Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Friday Roll Call. And for our usual crowd, it's awesome to be back here with you again. For those of you who are new this week, welcome. This is the forum where we dig deeper into the principles that our team has taught you by way of our keynotes, our breakout sessions, our workshops, the Top Gun Teamwork Program. And if you and I haven't yet had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Robert Teschner, call sign Cujo, founder and CEO here at Team VMAX Group. And this week we're going to talk about navigating conflict. And we need to because it's always there. It's a normal feature of human teams. All of us experience it, some of us on a more frequent basis. Question is, how do we position to successfully get through it while strengthening the team and building more capacity moving forward? So, technically speaking, we might want to spend a couple of days digging into this. Roll call reflections tend to be short, so we're just going to hit some of the high points, the wave tops, if you will, areas that I think we can agree on from the very get go. And it starts with it's probably best that we nip things in the bud, that we don't allow conflict to brew, to linger, to just sit there and fester, because oftentimes that leads to some form of escalation. Things tend to not get better over time. Quite the opposite, they tend to get worse. And most of us instinctively know that. And yet, many of us, especially those of us that are leaders here, can have a tendency to just kind of allow things to linger, maybe out of fear of escalation, maybe out of fear that confronting this conflict is only going to make things worse. And that can be a problem. Now, I'll caveat everything in today's roll call by saying leadership is situational. Every situation is a little bit different. There is no one size fits all here. Okay, so I will acknowledge that right up front. But then I'll tell you, if I had to default, I would say confront earlier, vice later, because in most cases, waiting doesn't help. Here's an illustration for you. I was on a team once. I was coming onto the team. The team dynamic was such that there was somebody who was kind of poisonous to the team. They had a sort of overall demeanor, disposition that was off-putting to the rest of the team. Did not function well with the rest of the team. The rest of the team did not give feedback to this team member about this, though, out of fear of escalation. And everybody just kind of resigned themselves to this is how it is around here. Now, were they frustrated with this dynamic? 100%. But they wrote it off as it's too risky to confront, so we're just gonna allow this thing to linger. All right. I joined the team. I felt like we had an obligation to the person who was now sort of isolated from the rest of the team because of this funky dynamic that had been there. We owed it to them, I thought, to have a conversation, to at least outline the truth of the matter, to give the perspective of what everybody else was saying and doing and thinking and all that kind of stuff. And actually got some counseling. Don't do it, Cujo. It's just not worth it. I felt we were obligated to do so, though. So I had the conversation. And what I found was, and this is interesting, and it could have gone totally different, I know, but this is what ends up happening. The person who was the source of the conflict had no idea, A, that this was the case, B, that there was this degree of conflict, and was stunned to find all of this out. Actually was really saddened by it. And when confronted with this revelation, changed the approach, which only helped the good of the team. And that's interesting. Ultimately, and again, every situation is unique, it didn't have to be that way. And if somebody had confronted earlier, chances are that in most cases, the revelation would have led to a change for the better sooner. Nobody felt good enough to do that, and here we were. So first takeaway, and it comes from the general principle that bad news only gets worse with time. Let's go ahead, and as a default, if we had to choose between one option or the other, let's try to nip in the bud. First comment about navigating, confronting conflict. Second point is how we approach it. And one of the things that I personally did in the conversation that I knew had the potential to go south, that I knew was going to hurt to hear, was try to be gentle and also to enter with a degree of curiosity. Let me understand where you're coming from. Let me understand what it is that you know. Let me understand what it is that you're seeing, you're feeling, you're thinking. Help me to understand where it is that you're coming from. And that's for sure a learned approach, especially for this guy. It's not my natural inclination. My natural inclination is to attack. And actually, in certain jobs that I've had in the past, flying fighters, that was actually probably a good disposition to have. But for interpersonal relations, I don't think that helps me very much. So I had to learn the art of entering into a potential conflict situation with curiosity so that I could help get ultimately the facts on the table so that there could be some mutual understanding to help us to navigate this thing. And from my vantage point, I also felt like I owed it, and I still do, to those with whom I'm navigating conflict to share my perspective, my viewpoint, my set of facts, which may indeed be in conflict with the other set of facts. And that's how these things go. But understanding that mutual understanding is a necessary precondition to taking any good out of this. We've got to do that. We've got to come into this way. And instead of leading with, well, here are my facts, I try to lead with, help me to understand where you're coming from. Described by my mentor, Mr. Michael Gerber, as entering with childlike curiosity. I like that overall explanation. I think it's really meaningful as we're doing this. Final point that we'll say in today's discussion is that we ought to have an objective. And the objective for this thing is to exit the conversation as we navigate this conflict with clarity of the way forward, with a plan for what we're going to do, potentially differently than what led us into this position. And knowing that the ambition is to chart a better way forward, it helps us to get rid of some of the distractions, helps us to prevent from going down some of the rabbit trails that organically may come up in a conversation like this, helps to potentially de-escalate a bit because we remind ourselves from time to time, hey, listen, I understand that you're upset. I know that I'm upset. But remember, we're trying to get to a better way forward here. So let's try to not emphasize the emotion so much, and let's try to figure out what action steps we can both agree to help us have a better tomorrow. And that, I think, can do a lot towards lowering the temperature in the room as we're trying to navigate through this. And it also might help somebody who's just been hurt by the revelation that has come to light as we've shared the facts to be able to bounce. I mean, we're looking for some resilience here. We're looking for a way to bounce as we're working through woundedness, if you will, to be able to have a better tomorrow. Good. So some interesting reflections here. And what's the source material for this? Answer is the structure of a debrief. And if you think about it, and you know from all of our conversations on debriefing here in Roll Call, one of the most important features of a debrief is that it happens immediately after the mission. And the reason for this is that we don't want to delay the debrief so that we start forgetting things or misremembering things. Because what ends up happening is that the set of facts that we have to build upon ends up being less truthful, it ends up being less complete, and so the analysis is therefore less effective for us. And so there's an immediacy factor. The debrief has to happen regardless of how bad the mission is, no matter how horrific the things were. We lost somebody died on this mission. We have to debrief this thing immediately. My default in conflict is let's nip this thing in the bud and let's try to solve the problem before it becomes bigger. That pulls from the debrief. What's the first step of the debrief after we've established mission, objectives, and plan? It's to get the facts on the table en route to revealing the full truth of what happened. And that's a really mission-critical feature to navigating conflict as well. So that's an interesting piece. And what's the ambition of a debrief? It's not to look backwards and blame anybody. quite the opposite. It's to fashion a strategy for what it is that we're going to do to make tomorrow better than today. Outcome of our navigation of conflict. What are we going to do to position ourselves to have a better tomorrow? So we're pulling from the richness of the structure of a debrief. And one of the things, and this is specifically now to my friends who are leaders out there listening, one of the things that we say now in every presentation that we give, if we haven't planned correctly, we don't have the right to practice accountability. Now, how does that factor in on us navigating conflict? One of the sources of conflict can be the absence of clarity of what it is that we're accountable for here, what it is ultimately I'm supposed to be doing. And the lack of clarity of expectations, the absence of understanding what we're accountable for is 100% a leadership function. Now, do we as teammates owe it to our leaders to ask for that clarity? Yes, we do. So it's a team dynamic as well. But at the end of the day, it's a leadership responsibility to set up for accountability. And as we navigate conflict, we as leaders have to be open to the possibility that we're the origin story to why we're here. But here's the great news. We can fix that, right? And the great news out of all of this is that our ambition in confronting conflict as early as possible is we can become a stronger team by virtue of how we navigate it. And the best teams handle failure really, really well. Whatever it was that led to this conflict, the best teams can navigate that very, very effectively. And in so doing, become a stronger team, which is our ambition. And so there's a few things for us to ponder as we go into this weekend. And it's rich material for reflection. In fact, I would highly encourage that you click on the links that are embedded in this week's roll call missive. Maybe check out Craig Weber's Conversational Capacity. For sure, take a look at the resources that are there to help all of us to learn to navigate a natural feature of human teams, conflict. It's always going to be there. How we rise to the occasion and lead through it, that's what we ought to be thinking about this weekend. And there it is. And just know, as always, all of us are rooting for you. And I look forward personally to seeing you again next Friday.